I really enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking to you guys. So, I mean, I'm not going to be mad if nobody listens, except for if my mom doesn't listen. That would be mean.
Wow. I kind of don't want my mom to listen
Yeah,
because
I'm like,
like I will use whatever, like I'm very sort of like open with my mom and will kind of use whatever language with her, but it's probably slightly like I should make fewer jokes about masturbating, I think. So.
oh, I have a funny story about masturbation.
All right, then.
No.
All
Is
right. So,
this
this
for a
is
today?
masturbation extra content. Uh, Take one
All right.
and go.
So I was 5 years old, maybe 6, and my brother had just bought the Dookie album from Green Day.
Oh God, what a good album!
So he's like 9 or 10, and so like probably not age appropriate, but here we are.
Yeah.
So we would listen to this in the basement like all summer long, and we would play video games together, and we got to the point where we were like learning all the lyrics and we were all excited about it. So we went upstairs to sing for my mom that, hey, we learned these lyrics. And I think it was Longview is the song. And there's definitely like F bombs in it. And we're of an age where we know you don't say F bombs. Like so we were singing along and singing, and the F bomb comes along and we go beep, like we didn't say it, it's okay. And
That's adorable.
My mom's pretty like she doesn't really care about swearing to begin with. It wasn't like a big deal, but it's still a respectful thing. Anyway, it comes to the following line after all of these things that we're blurting out. She's just kind of taking it in, and we sing, "When masturbation's lost its fun, you're effing lazy." And we bleeped out the F word because we knew you don't say that. And she like gasped and put her hand over her mouth. And we're like, we didn't say the F word, Mom. But we had no idea what we sang. And she's like, oh no.
That's classic. That's good.
That's so precious. That's very sweet.
Hi, welcome to Hey Look at My Thing with Keeghan Reynolds, Rachel Bennett, and Aaron Irons. On this podcast, we share things we are enthusiastic about with our friends. And this week, we are sharing Girl Genius.
All right, my body is ready.
So, first thing I'm going to ask, do either of you guys read webcomics?
Some. Occasionally.
Have you heard of the webcomic Girl Genius?
If I have, I wouldn't recognize it by name.
So I've actually, I've purchased the first book, soft book of Girl Genius. When I went to the Chicago Comic-Con, What Up Wizard World, for the first time. The one, I say first time like I go every year. It was one of 2 times that I went. I was thinking about a souvenir for my dad, and I knew that he read Girl Genius and brought it back for him. And he was confused and surprised, but also at the very least pretended to be delighted. He did actually read it. I remember that part. I think he was just like, well, I've already read this. What the fuck am I going to do with this? But it was like signed. It was the whole thing. I thought it was
yeah. That's cool. So, Girl Genius is a webcomic that started in 2005. It is still ongoing. There are 18 soft volumes, like you said. Each of those volumes is about 120 pages, so there's over 2,000 full-sized pages of comic book from this so far. It's by Phil and Kaja Foglio. I'm not saying that correctly, more than likely. It's won several awards. It's won 3 Hugo Awards and 5 Web Cartoonist Choice Awards. The setting is described by them as gas lamp fantasy. They wanted to kind of set it apart from steampunk, which it has a similar feel to, but it's not as gritty, and it's more fantasy and fantastical than like just straight up, clockworks and gears. Um, it's set in an alternative history Europe, and it follows the main character Agatha, who is a spark, which in this world is a special kind of genius who can almost beyond limits of like the laws of reality do scientific things. And there's like tons and tons of them in the books, but like they somehow make a thing, super fast, and like it's not really explained how they do it. It just they are able to do it because of some innate sort of talent they have. Um, and it follows her adventures through wars and romance and political intrigue and fashion and mad science and mystery. And overall, it's just kind of a delightful, sometimes absurd, always like exciting and funny and touching, uh, just really cool adventure. And it's also very beautifully done. The art is really cool and intricate, and it's just the pages themselves are just fun to look at. Um, I started reading, I want to say in like 2008. I own most of the soft books. I might be a couple behind. They also have recently, with like the last 5 years, started putting out novelizations that are like several of the volumes in just a novel form, and there's four of those. Um, and I've read, I think, three out of the four of those. Um, I found it because I read a lot of webcomics. I'm currently reading 25 different webcomics
Jesus.
actively. I have an app on my phone specifically just to alert me when my webcomics post, so I can read those, and it's like 5, 6, 7 every single day. Um, every year I go looking for like two or three to add because usually a couple end or people just stop posting. Um, and this is one of the earlier ones I got, and I'm just so glad it's still going because it's just lovely.
All right.
I am excited. I don't really read webcomics anymore because my original like feed reader that I was using back when I read a lot of them, they stopped supporting, and I just never found another good like RSS feed catcher that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
But I'm into it.
Yeah, I used to read quite a bit, like in late college / early work.
Ugh. Ugh.
Ugh.
What an unfortunate way to describe post-college life.
Yeah.
Early work.
Ew.
Well, it helped that when I started doing this, like I was working overnights as a security guard,
Right.
and sometimes there would be a computer there that would have the internet, like later in my security guard career. And if I would find a new webcomic, I would just go back to the very beginning and just burn through that archive
Mm-hmm.
as quickly as I could to get up to present, and then feel sad at that point because there was no more to read.
I have done that. I can relate to that.
Mhm.
So why don't we go ahead and read a bit of that, and then we can talk about what we read.
Sounds good.
See you on the other side.
Hey guys, it's me again with your friendly ad break. You might have noticed a bit of a blip in our production schedule. The reason for that was a bit of a blip in our weather cycle. We had a storm come through called a derecho. It's basically straight line winds, and we had gusts of up to 140 miles per hour. And it sort of devastated the local area. I personally was without power for an excruciating 10 days. No, 15? Too many. And Keeghan was without power for about 2 days after I was. And it's really devastated our area. In my small town, about 90% of properties took damage. So this week, as I'm telling you where to spend your money, I would recommend, if you have a little extra, if you're not in that area that was damaged, the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation has a disaster recovery fund. Our government has applied for national assistance, but it is less than hoped for and slow in coming, and they are working really, really hard to get resources to people who need them and get supplies to people who need them, especially people who are in low-income areas and are really struggling with the fact that this storm came through right after food stamps came through for most people. So a lot of people just sort of lost a month's worth of food as well. So if you have a little bit of extra time or money or volition and are able to give to help support the area in its recovery, it would really mean a lot to all three of us who all live in this area. Otherwise, if you don't, keep taking care of each other, keep taking care of yourself. We still love you, and we will see you next week.
All right, we are back. So, what did we just experience? Erins, thoughts?
So, when you said webcomic, the first thing that came to mind was like Order of the Stick or XKCD or something where like I'm jumping into this and I'm expecting some quips, something funny and brief and detached, and maybe a very simple art style. And I have to say, it was none of these things at all. It was very art focused. You could tell that was a major component to it. And it was all about setting up a very, very long arc. And if you hadn't given me any sort of introduction, I might not have gotten within that hour to really understand this character well.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially those first 50 comics were kind of confusing in terms of setup and like, who is this person and why does this matter? And yes, there were things happening, but there was just a lot of like world building, but even then it was kind of confusing world building. Like they introduce concepts in a way that's like, oh, this is just the way that it is, it's a great way to set up a world. But I also had so many questions, like, and I almost felt like I didn't understand enough going into it to absorb some of those things. There is a comic full of subtlety.
Yeah.
I had exactly the same kind of response to it, Erin, and I kind of felt like an asshole, actually, because like I feel like there is merit to a slow burn in a beginning, right? Like I don't want you to lay everything out for me in the simplest terms. That's not going to take me where I want to go by any means. And I felt like maybe it was because I was like reading too fast or like not taking my time with it. Or I felt like I was the one who was in error to like be a little bit confused or like a little bit disconnected. I think that the beginning wants to set everything up so quickly that it kind of rushes over some of the development. Like, so as far as, I don't know where you got to. I stopped right as he's like starting to tell the story, the heterodyne boys and the dragon from Mars. Like, I'm on the first page of that, and that's where I stopped.
I think you're ahead of me.
Okay.
So I'm going to do my best to sum up this so that our listeners can kind of have an idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So this starts with like a fairy tale beginning, and they mention, I don't know if they even mention sparks right away. They come up soon. But there's just kind of this, it is a almost steampunk world building. And they talk about, I don't know if they did mention heterodynes. There was just so much stuff thrown at me in the first panel. And I was like, okay, like this is going to matter, but I don't really understand it. So I'm moving on. I'm just going to gloss over that, and I'll let you guys clean up after me. It starts off with the main character, Agatha, in the town square. There's like a lightning arc that kind of hits everything in town. And it's confusing, and she gets thrown into these soldiers who accost her and steal her locket, which is something of importance. Then she goes to the university where she works as a lab assistant. There is a great exchange, some struggles of power. There is a baron or hair baron. He's like the big head honcho, and he is the overseer of Sparks. He's definitely a man in charge, and not willing to cede any of that power. He has a protege. The name is
Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh. Yep. Okay. And there is a mayor of the town who's there. There's also a couple other scientists. There is it's kind of like an audit almost of their work, and it was all a setup. But then the mayor is like trying to one up this hair baron, reveals some technology called the Hive engine or something. But then he brings out these robot automatons that are going to fight. And then the other guy has a bunch of automatons, and it like escalates. Essentially, it's a back and forth for a really long time. And then the mayor ends up pulling out a bomb, throwing it. Gilgamesh knocks it back and blows up the mayor. That's like the culmination of all of that happened. Agatha loses her job. So she's just had a really traumatic day, by the way. Lost her job, lost her locket. She seems to be handling it surprisingly well.
Lost her boss, who she was like friends with.
Yes.
Yeah.
She goes home. Her Franken dad and mom, which are not her real mom and dad, but maybe if they mention her uncle, I don't even know the relationship. Did I miss that?
No,
they seem to be like
they're surrogate. They're surrogate parents.
Okay.
Like they were told by her uncle to like stay and take care of her, and like they clearly care for her, but it's not like a familial relation, I don't think.
Right. So that like there was so much that I could have learned there that they really glossed over, and you accept as is, and they really deep dive into other plot points. So there's anyway, they are very concerned that she lost her locket. It becomes revealed that the locket has certain powers to probably control her spark from manifesting, is what I'm gathering. But again, none of this is directly said. I am reading a lot between the lines.
Well, and we don't really have a good idea of what a spark does, aside from the fact that it like has something to do with technical aptitude, and it is highly sought after.
Yes. Right. There's so much up to this point that is so unclear. But we get the general idea. There's also these Jaeger monsters, which are German monster people who have below average intelligence, but are extremely violent and are thugs of this hair baron, which are kind of also comic relief to some degree.
Yeah.
So moving on, Agatha builds a automaton in her sleep, we think, and the brothers who stole her locket one of them ends up dying from the charge or whatever it does to her and keeps her in check is super potent and is like lethal to other people. So he takes the locket and comes back to her. She had built an automaton.
The other brother, not the dead one.
Yes,
important.
The living brother. Thank you.
Yeah.
He goes and tries to, like, he has a vendetta, but like it doesn't turn out the way he thinks. They get into a little bit of a scuffle. She builds an automaton that goes loose in the city. The Hair Baron finds out that somebody built this as a retaliation for the mayor dying. Goes, sends it back to its owner. He traps them both. His conclusion is that the brother is the spark and that she is just a worthless lab assistant. Takes them hostage. This is where things got more interesting to me. Up to this point, there were some cool things happening, but it was also really slow. I felt like it started to pick up once you got introduced to these other prisoner characters. They had more, certainly more color, which was welcome, and more personality, and actually more dialogue and building relationships. But she gets introduced to a couple of the lower pecking order characters that she becomes closer friends to. She actually gets to have a meeting with Gilgamesh. There are other sparks there, and one of them is this really snooty, high-class lady. You can tell that most sparks are nobles, or nobles are sparks, or something. There's a class order to it. But you don't really know how often that occurs or how often commoners have spark or not. It's kind of left gray. What I found most interesting here, and I'm going to go off on a slight tangent, is the thing that really resonated was the idea of holding your noble family's kids hostage, which is a thing and has historically been a thing for a long time. And it's kind of terribly cruel, but also like they still treat them pretty well generally. It's a weird, like, don't do anything stupid because we have your kids, but also you're going to educate them and then marry them off and then, you know, make the next line of terrible people that will rule the world.
Right. It's sort of like a double-edged sword, right? Because like parents now like scrape and push and shove and commit crimes to get their kids into the best schools, and like the sort of like trade-off was your kid will get the absolute best education because they're being educated with the young royals, right, who can have the best tutors and will have the best shit. And it was good for the royals to have kids around who were like of the same age, and that's good for the nobles, and it's like good for child development. But also they're like, yeah, but we're gonna take your kid from you. So like, there's definitely a trade-off where like
pros and cons to that.
And the threat,
but, I mean, effectively it's like a boarding school as far as the kids are concerned, which I have separate problems with. But it's, as far as the parents are concerned, this is like a heinous blackmail and they have your flesh and blood, which is a problem.
Like it's real life. Like if you do something stupid, we will kill your kid is the threat. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think that's where I stopped. If you guys got a little bit further, you can go ahead and fill in a little bit more.
So obviously Keeghan is much further. I really did only get a little bit further. So the other things that I added were pretty small, actually. So you have those characters, and I think it's maybe slightly like, so the people that he's holding are, most of them, or most of the ones that she's interacting with, are not actually sparks. Like that's not necessarily their thing, although it seems like maybe that's true for some of them. Most of them are not. Most of them are like nobles in that situation where they're like, okay, well, we're going to keep you to keep your family in line. We added a character who is really heavily foreshadowed, named Von Pin, who is like the caretaker, I guess, except sort of not. She's like supposed to be, I guess I don't know that she's supposed to be, but she's like drawn in a style that makes her seem like she's kind of supposed to be in direct contrast with Agatha. it's sort of like an art thing throughout, especially the first sections we read, but honestly, even the later sections, that like everyone has basically the same body type. And that body type is the sort of like superhero, like exaggerated style. She definitely has that. She has like the same kind of blonde. When she's not looking super scary, they look kind of similar. And she like makes a point. She's like freaking out at Agatha and like, why did you spend time with Gil? And she's like, well, I don't really want anything to do with Gil. And then Von Penn is like, well, what's the problem with Gil? And it's just, it's kind of, it's a little bit odd. And it's clear that she's pretty unhinged. But she like pulls out a pocket watch and is like, I have class in 3 minutes and I'm never late. And it's like clearly supposed to be like a jab at the fact that this whole thing started with Agatha being late. So she was like foreshadowed as being terrifying, and then was in fact terrifying. Aside from that, she like had a meeting with Gil and they got in a plane and we got to see like the actual castle where they are, which is kind of cool actually, because it's like a big fucking fuck off Zeppelin, which is very neat. So their castle is like a Zeppelin surrounded by smaller ships that they use for like transport and things like that, for like day-to-day things. But Gil like very specifically mentioned, oh yeah, no, there are people who like haven't set foot on the ground in decades. Which is both horrifying and kind of cool, in equal parts.
So let me answer a couple of questions here. So they started developing this in the early 90s, the background for this story. So all the world building and stuff, they have it all fleshed out for like a decade before they even started putting it out. So like all this stuff is known, but they don't like, I've looked online to try to like get like maybe more background information and you know, it's like, oh, what's going on? There isn't any. Like all the information they give you is the hints and small things they drop, you know, from time to time during other parts. So there's a ton of really big mysteries going on inside of the comic, like in the actual comic world. Like where did the how do you say it? I can't remember how to say it. Heterodyne boys go to? Like they just disappeared. Nobody knows where they went to. Who created these slaver wasps that can take over people's bodies? What kind of technology do they use? Like there's all these sorts of questions like in the actual story that you slowly get to know. Like I am, you know, 15 years past where this is, and there are still a lot of those questions that are still unknown to me. So I don't know how much I should say, but on an art thing, Rachel, the scene where they showed the outside of Castle Wolfenbach.
Yes, that was a particularly sort of like stunning spread. In general, that one I think was, so out of what I've seen, even going forward and like looking at the last couple, I think that was kind of a high point as far as art that I've seen. To be honest, for me, I was pleasantly surprised. I think I was in the same boat with Erin, that these were like, it feels like a comic book, right? Like they use panels in the way that comic books use panels. They use word bubbles to like show emotion in the way that comic books use like word bubbles and lettering to show emotion. So a lot of the things that they do from like the structure of a comic are not only good from like, this is a comic perspective, but are also a surprise from this is a webcomic perspective, especially at the time. I feel like that like strip style, like Garfield style, was a lot more frequent, was a lot more common.
Yeah.
And they even do, especially in like the early ones, or like right now I was just kind of like clicking back through, and I'm at one where she's like having the discussion with Gil, and they do some really cool things with the panels and get a little bit creative with it, which is cool. This was sort of like, from a time perspective, this was kind of like the heyday of like mixing things up with panels and like starting to really experiment with what that format could offer and how readers can like interpret and move through panels in a way that makes sense. So it's cool to see that happening. That's pretty like on the edge. But for me, there's even in the new, like the art style leaves something to be desired for me. I actually think that my favorite out of what I've seen is the earlier black and white stuff. The color is not inexpertly applied by any means. It's just like a lot for me. And it's got this kind of like smooth airbrushy quality that turns it into something that's like cartoony in a kind of bad way for me. Like the story isn't particularly okay. The story isn't particularly cartoony except when it is. And there's a couple of places where the humor kind of falls flat for me. Like one of the big jokes about when she's at the castle, when they've like abducted her, because that's what's happened, is that they abducted her in her pajamas and everybody's making fun of her for being naked or whatever. Like, man, that humor did not connect with me. I was not into it. I'm not here for that. I'm not about it. It's clear that that is something that is kind of set up from the beginning. Like, honestly, I could have predicted that from the fucking art style. Like, it was not a huge surprise. But I almost preferred the kind of like black and white sketchy style that we got at the beginning, or that like very low color style, as opposed to when the color pops all the way in later. It just feels really a lot.
I think, this is my guess, I think that's intentional. I think it's a Wizard of Oz sort of thing.
I think it is too. Like, I'm sure that is an intentional choice. I wish that we had stayed a little bit more kind of like toward the middle. And I'm sure that it like balances out a little bit as things go on. And they're like trying to really, really draw the difference between like, oh, this is where we were and this is where we are. But even though I get the fact that it's supposed to illustrate like, oh, the world's changing, like Wizard of Oz, that's a good comparison, right? They're pulling that same trick, and it's really common in visual media. It just was maybe a little bit too much for me. My eyeballs were like, whoa, I need a place to chill out for a second, and it is not here. So that's kind of where I'm at as far as the art goes. I think that the style actually seems pretty well developed from the beginning. And looking at the late ones, like a lot of the things that you see stylistically in the beginning seem to continue toward the end. The line work maybe gets a little bit cleaner, a little bit bolder, but otherwise it stays pretty similar, despite the fact that there's that like 15 years that they were doing it, which I think speaks more to the fact that they're like very detailed, and it clearly a lot of like time and intent was put into them. And it looks like you expect a comic book to look, honestly.
Yeah, I want to piggyback just another thought off of the art. There was like you said, it was the pajama scene. Like right when I saw her put on the pajamas, the first thought that popped in my head is, oh, this is for somebody. And this is
yeah, when she's like being hefted up in her pajamas, there's like one scene where you can see like a pretty gratuitous amount of her ass, and I was like, man, I'm not here for that.
Right.
Not. And then while talking about how she smells good was like very bad to me.
Yeah,
I
really
was
like
not. I was not here for that. I'm sure it's like a reference to something, and it'll come back later. Like they can smell a spark in people or whatever, but like it was not good.
I felt uncomfortable.
That's the thing that a guy at the bar says, and then you're like, cool, well, I'm out, and I'm just gonna like call 15 people to walk me out.
No, they like if you notice, the only people that say it are the Jaegers, for a very specific story reason. So like as it goes on, you get a lot more political intrigue with who, like her background and various different kind of warring factions in this Europe. Like currently, like right at the spot where you are at, there had been a war, and then the Baron basically stopped the war by taking over everything. So like he took control of all of Europe to basically stop an ongoing war that had been going on for like 20 years. And so like the entirety of Europe, for the most part, is under his control. So a great deal of what he does is like what happened in the first scene where he went to a town that like he runs but doesn't administer, because you can't, administer, 1,000 different towns. You have to put people into place, and just does periodic checks to make sure they're not thinking of rebellion or doing anything crazy, like in this case, having a weapon of mass destruction brought into the center of town.
For
Um,
example.
and I really like what they do in this. Like the most laudable trait like anybody can have, that's like well thought of, not only an intellectual, but like people find it attractive in the people that they want to be with as partners, is like scientific aptitude. Like if you are like really well versed in the sciences, that's like a major turn on for like 90% of the population.
That's interesting.
It's an interesting world, like the steampunk parts with like the clanks and that kind of stuff, and then the kind of biological sort of sciences where there are like constructed beings. Like her parents are constructed beings. They were created Frankenstein like, and they also, people, if they die, as long as their head remains okay, you can bring them back to life. So when the mayor of the town died and they're like, oh, his head's not okay, if his head was okay, they could have brought him back to life and talked to him. So there's a lot of kind of moral things to that. Like at one point, they talk about how if you've ever been brought back to life, you're no longer allowed to like hold a noble title, so that you can't just hold it forever. Just keep bringing yourself back to life over and over and over again.
Sure.
The first time you're brought back to life, you have to pass on the noble title to your next of kin or whatever.
Interesting. So, okay, that's... I really like when things establish rules that are like, this is how the world is, and as long as it doesn't really tug at your willing suspension of disbelief, a lot of times people will just say like, okay, that's what's true in this world. And I feel like there are a lot of good stories that get at that pretty quickly, and yet introduce new concepts continually. For instance, Harry Potter does a pretty good job of like, there's magic in this world, and here's that right on the first page, and we're going to spoon feed you little by little new spells, and kind of like, this is the way things are, in a very British and like matter of fact, like it just reminds me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it's like they just say, the dolphins are from space, and they're going to go back to space. And so long
the
as they
Bogons
spell
are coming. You better get your shit together. Like,
Yeah.
and just that like matter of fact humor, like 42, like duh, like this is the way that it is. I think that Harry Potter has a very good way of doing that. And there are other media. Oh gosh, what is something that we all know? Like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, maybe.
That's good. That's good.
You're actually right though. That's a really good example of that. Like they don't even fucking wait until you're in the episode, do they? You get the intro at the beginning, one girl in all the world, and the dramatic thing and the cutscenes and the whatever. And like you immediately know, like, okay, here's the setup. There's one person, it's gonna be a chick, she's gonna kill some demons and shit. Cool, done, got it. I've got the rules of this world down. And then like,
yeah.
And you don't even have to wait until you get into the episode. Although I do believe the first scene of the first episode is her like kicking vampire ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the first issue was like her in town, and the second issue is her on Castle Wolfenbach. And then from there, it kind of follows her journey trying to figure out these mysteries and what's going on and kind of establish herself in this world. And there's a lot of interesting and strong characters all throughout. Um, and the Jaegers are comic relief a lot of the times, like you mentioned. But I just like how when I read it, it feels like there's a whole wide world going on that we're not seeing. Like when they're walking through and talking about stuff, it feels like you could be in a real world and you're walking and you're talking about stuff like it's just real. You're not just shooting exposition so that the people can know the context of what you're saying. You're just talking.
Right.
And I do like how these people feel like they're a part of this world.
So I think that is like exactly what I want if I'm in like an RPG, right?
Mm.
Like even in one, like we all tabletop and also video game RPGs, right? And there's a big difference between those things. But really in either one, that is exactly what I want. Like I want fucking Planescape Torment style where you are like going through and you're like, shit, there is a lot happening here. I don't really understand all of it. But I have within me the ability to ask questions to deepen my knowledge. There's nobody holding the reins but me. So if there's something I'm interested in, I can find out more about it. I can make that a goal and pursue it and find out more about it. And if there's something that is a mystery but I don't actually give a shit about, I can just ignore that and I can continue to not give a shit about it. I think the disconnect, the thing that makes it hard to kind of latch on or attach to the characters, is that there's so much I don't know. And I have no way of figuring it out.
Yeah.
There's like no recourse for me to gain any kind of depth of knowledge that would make me feel more comfortable inhabiting this world, right? If you're walking by somebody, people on the street having a conversation in a language you don't know, you're not going to be able to understand unless you spend a lot of time immersed in that. Like here, I can't even spend a lot of time immersed in it and know that I'm going to have questions or answers to my questions.
You do get some answers, like I don't want to say like they always keep you in the dark about stuff. They keep you in the dark about some big things on purpose, but I'd say like 2 or 3 like issues in, you've got a fairly good grasp of what's going on and how the world works. And then those small other things, those small other secrets, when you do discover them, there's a really nice feeling of like almost accomplishment for like, it's like, oh, wow, that's what's going on. That's so interesting. And I have gone back and reread everything like 2 or 3 times, and when you go back and reread with the knowledge, it's almost a different story because you can understand like what's going on in the background everywhere. And so I don't know, I've been able to enjoy it a couple different times and a couple different levels just because of the different amounts of information I had coming into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's got a strong world building, and it does have a very defined and interesting setting. The thing that I think that it lacks is the hook. And if you give it the time that it demands, really, in order to get to that point where you really get engrossed in it, which I think is more than an hour, that you will feel those rewards. And I believe you. And I think we were starting to get there in some places, but the hard part is like, it's not necessarily as inviting as other media that I have come in contact with.
Yeah, it definitely is a tougher door. I think if you get past the second issue, you'll be good. If you can get past basically the end of, like, actually, I mean, where I was at, it was starting to get pretty close to the point where you can just kind of sit back and enjoy a little bit.
All right. We kind of really hit a lot of big things with this guy. One question I have for you, Keeghan. So you had
Yeah.
mentioned you probably got into this when you were working as a security guard,
Mhm.
but why did this particular comic resonate with you?
I don't know. I started reading it, and I liked the art style. I liked the humor in it. Um, I liked it was exciting. There was a lot of action going on. Um, and the more I read, the more I was became invested in the world itself. Like once I had gotten to a certain point, I wanted to know more about what was going on, and the only way I could learn more about what was going on was to keep reading the story. Um, I think an easier way to get this story, if you don't want to, read 2,000 pages of comic books, the books are pretty good. They um, give background a little bit more traditionally rather than in this style. So I think the novels are like an easier way to digest this. And having read both these and the novels, there are some things in the novels that they make a little bit more clear than in the comics, so that like after you read the novels, you have even a better understanding of the world. But it's a there's a commitment to this whole thing that if you don't want to make, it's going to make it tough to you couldn't be like a casual fan
Mhm.
of this, really. Either you're going to read it all or you're going to find something else.
Yeah.
And I read it all.
So again, this is not my first exposure to this. Although my previous exposure was very brief. It was like flipping through and being like, I don't know if this is for me. I still don't know if this is for me. Like giving it an hour is sort of like what we have given all of the media that we have experienced is about that amount of time.
Yeah.
And generally that should be a pretty good amount of time to know if a thing is going to be for you or not. I could see it. Like, I could see how it could evolve into something that would be really good. I just don't know if I'd be willing to put in the time to know if it evolves into something that for me is really good. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I would definitely need more time to engage with it. I was starting to really get interested in this section more so than the beginning. So there was definitely, at first I was like looking at my watch at the first few comics and I'm like, oh man. and then it started to get a little more interesting, and that was not the case anymore. Like once we got to the castle, I was definitely more engaged. So I tend to need somebody to kick me into a direction to get into something, and then when I find that I've sunk my teeth into it, I'm more likely to get into it. And this may be similar. I mean, you guys should know I've already watched all of Pushing Daisies, and so it's not like I haven't sunk my teeth into other things. So we'll see. This is a definite maybe for me at this point.
Definitely maybe.
Definitely maybe. All right, so I think that'll wrap it up for this week. Erin, why don't you tell us what we're doing next week?
Yes, so we are going to go through another video game, and we are going to be talking about Stardew Valley.
I'm very excited.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to it, and I will see you guys on the other side.
See you later, guys.